Somebody in the house ought to be able to say amen. I'm going to say amen like you mean it. Oh. You really can't have this whole world. But I'll take Jesus. Oh, my. Turn with me in your Bibles, if you will, to Judges chapter 7. Judges chapter 7. It's the third sermon in our series, Lessons from the Life of Gideon. As we pick up from the second, focusing our attention on the 2nd through 15th verses. Judges chapter 7, verses 2 through 15. And our key verse for the morning, for the afternoon, will be verse number 15. So when you found verse number 15 of that chapter, will you say amen? We have verse 15 on the screen. We'll have our scriptures on the screen, the King James translation. So if you don't mind, let's stand together and read verse 15 of Judges chapter 7 together as a family member. As the verse begins and says this, "And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian." Well, now let's read that one more time like we mean it. "And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian." As you take your seats, lessons from the life of Gideon. We've been looking at what I like to call two different segments of the journey that the Lord has brought Gideon on, beginning in chapter 6. And we opened up with the first sermon on, with a focus on the call of Gideon. And our life lessons we have on the screen for you from the first sermon were that God is faithful in all our trials to fulfill his promises while preparing his servants for a victorious life. Secondly, we focused in on how God inspires believers to trust him and his presence and his purpose in all of life's circumstances. And finally, we focused our attention on how God empowers believers to step out in faith, standing on his word and trusting in his plan for our lives. As the Lord called Gideon in the midst of a time frame when, as the chapter 6 opens up, it says that Israel had done evil in the sight of God, and he had turned them over to the Midianites, and they were rampaging the land, and every time they would have a crop, they would just swoop in with their armies and their people and devastate the land and take everything away. And there is Gideon up there hiding and threshing wheat in the midst of a wine press to try to keep some for his family. And God calls him into a power-filled journey and says to him, "You are a mighty and valiant man. You're a man of valor. And through your hands I will deliver and save Israel." And on last Sunday, we spent a little time together looking at the second half of that chapter 6 with 3 life lessons, our focus being on where God directs us, he always protects us. And we further walked down through the latter part of that chapter, looking at how when God's enemies challenge God's plan, it's important for us to stand firm on God's promises. And finally, we spent a little time last Sunday as he was dealing with the testing of the Lord. Gideon saying, "Well, can you make this fleece dry and the ground wet, and this ground dry and the fleece wet?" Gideon is going through his prospect where God is moving him through what I like to call the training period of Gideon. When your faith needs reassuring, seek God's blessing and obey his teaching. This week we move on to the segment that I like to call in the sermon series, the time of testing. Time of testing. From the call to the training to the testing. And when we close out chapter 7, I'll read that first verse and pick up at the second, just so that it reads in. "Then Jerubbaal," that is Gideon, "and all his people who were with him rose up early and encamped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was north of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. Then let's pick up that second verse. I've got two life lessons I'm sharing today. Verses 2 through 8 focus us in on the first. King James says, "And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that thou art with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands." Listen to him. "Lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me." Then verse 3 goes on to say, "Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 20 and 2,000, and there remained 10,000. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down into the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go." So he brought down the people unto the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, "Every one that lappeth the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink, likewise those that bow down to the knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that lapped will I save thee, and deliver the Midianites into thy hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto his place." So the people took victuals in their hand and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained there 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. Life lesson 1, if you're jotting down. The power of God's preparation for victory is experienced in the process of his proving our faith. The power of God's preparation for victory, we're in the testing time now, is experienced in the process of God's proving our faith. If you think back and walk through this journey with Gideon, you'll see how God is, as he calls him and he begins to deal with the man, he instills in him a confident word. He cast a vision inside of the man so that he could understand that this is not something that you'll be doing by yourself, nor is it something that you can do of your own might. You're hiding out as one who has the mentality and the mindset of a victim. And God is now trying to move him to the understanding that he's a different man when he's walking with the Lord, and that God has a plan and purpose for his people. And even when they do evil things in the sight of God, God has not given up. They go on them. They're going through disciplinary moments, but God has not given up on them. They're experiencing some hardship, but God has not given up on them. They've worshipped idols. They put altars to Baal and Asherah poles up and worshiped them along like their neighbors were doing, but God still had not given up on his people. And so he says, I'm sending somebody to you. I've got one among you whom I have absolutely prepared over time. He doesn't even recognize the power that has been designed in him. He doesn't, in his fear, he doesn't see and understand the giftedness that God has placed inside of him. But yet God has prepared him for this moment in time. And even while he's hiding and ducking and trying to keep things for himself, God is working in him to do something fabulous for his people. And because God recognizes that we are fearful beings, that we have this tendency to look at our circumstances and measure our probability of success over against the level of the impact of the circumstances on our lives, rather than looking at the size of our God and measuring him against the size of our circumstances. He knows that he loves us enough that he knows he has to work in, he has the faith of the actual man, the potential man, so that it becomes the actual man over against the fearful man. that wants to duck and hide when circumstances get bad. So when God gives a promise, don't hate on the process. Can I say it that way? God's in it, and he's working. When Gideon, I'm trying to get past this. When Gideon says, Lord, if you're really with us, why is it that we're suffering so much here? Why are things so bad? I mean, you're the God of the universe. You got everything. You know everything. You're everywhere. Then why is it that your folk are struggling down here? And when God reassures him and comforts him and calls him and moves him through the training process, he makes it plain to him that I'm not only calling you to do what needs to be done for your people, and not only have I prepared you for it, but I am with you. I'm your present help in a time of need. And now as he gets to the point of the testing component, he's now beginning to help Gideon to realize that it's not by might, and it's not by power, and it's not by your intellectual prowess that we're going to attain the victory, but it's by the Lord. So Gideon thinks Gideon needs a reassuring moment and goes through this whole fleece thing process. And God allows him to go through two modes of that. And then as Gideon has blown the trumpet, getting happy, and he sees that God's people have now flocked to him, 32,000 by number, the text tells me. They've gathered themselves around the springs of Harod and the camp of Midian, and it looks like the numbers are swelling up so that he can visually see that there's an army ready to go to the battle. These are the same people, by the way, who were shrinking and ducking and hiding when Midianites were coming down before Gideon had blown the trumpet. They were the ones that were hiding. They'd come down. Midianites would come down like bullies, and as soon as the Israelites would pack their lunch, they'd come running in and just snatch their lunch from them and say, no, you're not going to eat today. But now they've seen that God is doing something in the leadership of this one man who he's called to work. Can I take this moment here? I'm trying to get through this thing. And their hearts have been strengthened to a degree. And so they flock behind Gideon and follow. And then God says to Gideon, the next life lesson that we're going to have, Gideon, is one that helps you understand that even though you're involved, I'm involving you in the leadership of this thing, this really isn't about you. This really is bigger than you, son. And rather than you getting yourself getting all happy because, I've shown you a few miracles and I've tried to weed out some of the fear inside of you, I need you to recognize that I've got one more very important lesson to you before you go live with this project. And that is, there is an important aspect in the process that God calls sifting. And every now and then, God has to sift some things from your life. Lest, as my text tells me, you think that it is by your own hand. Am I reading this right? Lest you think that it is by your own intellect, lest you think it is by your own might, lest you think it is by your own hand that you have obtained the victory. I need to just, Jesus might call it, I need to prune you a little bit. Because the mindset of man is clearly one, and God just walks him through it, clearly one where it wants to absolutely grab hold of glory wherever there is victory. Am I saying this right? If we get a little power, or if we get a little status, or we get a few things around us that make us feel like that we've got some stuff, then the tendency, the sinful tendency in man is that we will try to take credit for it. Isn't that the reason, one of the reasons that you hear the Lord saying so powerfully in the New Testament, it is by faith and through grace that you're saved. The principle underneath of that is not by your works. Why? Because you're going to think that it's by your own hand you have found a way to save yourself. Same principle, Old Testament shadow typing, pointing you towards the New Testament principle. Here it is. He says, we're gonna read this down because you need to understand. You think you've got 32,000 men because the emotion of the moment, they have risen up and come to you and said, let's go to battle. You know, the Lord has called you. You're a mighty man of valor. Let's go do this thing. God says, let's go take our vengeance out on the enemy. Let's go do this thing. But he says, inside of that 32,000, you don't understand the mental makeup of what's going on here. So let me help you out. First of all, we'll let them do a self-sifting process. Anybody that's shaky? It's one of those moments when he said everybody that really wants to go into battle, step forward. And out of 32,000 of them, 10,000 step forward. 22,000 said, well, man, you know, I'm really with you, Pastor. I love the vision that you got. And I know that you're a mighty man of the Lord. But I got family back here. You know, for a moment I was there. My heart was there. And if you had rushed me out, I might have gone on out emotionally into the battle. But now that I've had a moment to think about it, and since you've asked the question, I mean, you know, if you hadn't asked the question, I might have been with you. But since you're giving me my out, then, you know, I got family over here. I got this job I got to take care of, and, you know, and if it's all right, I'll just go on back home, and I'll watch it on the news. Send the report back of how that went. I'm trusting in the Lord. You know, I'll take it via the text me. And then the Lord says, but I'm not finished with you, because in this process, you need to understand how God is unfolding the power of his preparation in you, and how the process of proving is absolutely there to make you stronger and less fearful about who's doing this, and how the victory has already been won. Somebody in the house needs one of those I understand moments that God has already given me the victory. I know that God has given me the victory moments, and willing to step out on the process. Somebody in the house is struggling with where you are right now, and you're thinking, okay, my God is a good God, and he said that all things will work out for good to those who are called according to his purpose. And my goodness, my God has certainly said he'll take care of me, never seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. I'm part of the righteous and his seed, and I don't need to be begging bread. But in the midst of this, I feel like that I'm in a tumultuous type of moment right now, and I need to hear from God. Talk to me if you're live. I need to hear from God at this very moment in time. And God is in the process of building strength in you by sifting stuff from you, and you think that that's a punishment. The enemy is probably whispering in your ear, in your spiritual ear, saying, now see, your God's not good. He's taking stuff from you. You got all this. He probably whispered in Gideon's head, man, you had 32,000 folk. What kind of God is that he's going to take your strength from you and send you out to seeming slaughter? And then turn around and say, now, only give me the guys who get down and lap like dogs when you get to the water. What's all that about? And only 300 of 32,000. Is this the 1% rule? What is this? But God was letting them know not only after self-sifting sometimes comes God sifting. There are times when he equips you so that you can see with your own eyes that the people around you or the circumstances around you are not where you need to place your faith. Talk to me. Talk to me. And then he wants you to understand there's still some sifting to be done, because even though their hearts and minds might be in the right place, they're not observant enough, nor bold enough, nor persistent enough to be able to take the journey that I'm about to put you on. This vision may be bigger than them. It may be too complicated for them. They may mean well, but these are the folk that aren't going to be looking out for your best interests. The question is, am I going to get down here and take my eye off the enemy and let my thirst overwhelm me? Or am I going to be doing this thing while I'm looking out? Am I going to be lapping and looking? And therefore make sure I've got my eye on the principle and the prize and the process of God. And he wanted Gideon to clearly understand that with less than 1%, this is the way we're going to do the job. And you will not attempt. And when this victory comes, you will not attempt to claim glory for this. You know, if you want to personalize it, it might be like it might be like the Lord taking a handful of folk and saying, when I bless you with your structure, walk with me for a second. Even though you're in a gymnasium and you got no heat in the winter and you got no cooling in the summer, and you're always putting up chairs and tearing chairs down, even though don't nobody want to come see you because they don't think you're permanent yet, because you ain't got no place of your own. God's going to be audacious enough to say, when I bless you, you're going to know that it was only through my grace. And everybody else will know that it's only through my grace. I'll give you something you never even dreamed about. I'll make the ministry effective in ways you never even thought about. And, oh, here's a caveat. And even though there's only a handful of you here, I'll do it so that you won't even be in debt. Well, Lord, everybody else is in debt. And so he can take a handful and accomplish a mighty act, which tells us clearly it's not about head count. Head count is fine. Fill up the seats, Lord. This is your house. You built it. You fill it. But he can take a handful of folk and rock the world if they'll just walk with him and follow his promises. That's where I'm going with Gideon. And so he narrows him down to 300 people. And Gideon, and he walks him through the process. I love the way the details are just rich. He walks him through the process of understanding through the self-sifting and then understanding through the God-sifting, where he has to be obedient. And then he says, now, here's your army. Now go. Now go. Let me pick up with verse 9. Amplified says, King James has it up there. Amplified says, the same night, the Lord said to Gideon, arise. Now, this is after he's narrowed down to 300, and Gideon is looking out, as the text says, below him and sees a valley of Midianites that are too numerous to count. 300 up here, uncountable numbers down there. And God says, go. I mean, if it was me, I probably would have said, Gideon, listen, you put me through that nonsense with the fleece. I was gracious enough. I mean, what was that all about anyway? I was gracious enough to walk through that stuff with you just to calm some of your fears. And so now came your testing time. So we need to find out if you can withstand the sifting and your faith will be girded up. Because all of this is preparing not only your faith walk, but it's developing your character so that you know that you know that you know that God is faithful. And now that we've seen this, it's time for you to begin to take a step forward. So verse 9, that same night, rise up and go against the camp, for I've